welcome everyone to this month's Kimball Talk. Super excited to hear from Brother Bryson Keith, all the way from reporting from Hawaii. Super excited to hear his story and what he has to share with us. But before we get started tonight, of course, I have some announcements. But first off, my name is Brian Field. I am the Director of Character Development for the National Fraternity of Kappa Delta Rho. And yeah, let me just kick off with some announcements that I have. First and foremost, I say this every month. If you have not had a chance to update your information with the national office, please go to kdr.com /mykdr to log in and update all of your personal information as much as you would like to give us. Your address, your email, any and all of that. We really love to keep in touch with you and all the great things you're doing. And so in order to do that, we need all the latest and greatest information from you. So please take a second to do that if you haven't done so in a while. Second, I have a whole list of shout outs from KDR World. So I'm just going to go through those. So last night, this is hot off the press. Last night, the board approved the charters for 2 new chapters. So the Kappa chapter from the Ohio State University, they are coming back online with us, so congratulations to them. And then we have a brand new chapter charter, the new Gamma chapter at the College of New Jersey. So they will be having their chartering ceremonies in the fall, but wanted to give a quick shout out and congratulations to both of those chapters. We're really excited. I've been working with both of those chapters. I know it's years in the making, so congratulations to those chapters for sure. We also have a new intern for the office taking over our social media and helping us out. Irving, as I announced last month, will be leaving the intern role and coming on staff. So we're super excited about that. But we have Nate Reyes. Hey, Nate. Glad you could make it. He is from Alpha Beta, the University of Delaware. He will be taking over our social media. So that is super exciting. Looking forward to seeing all the great work that you do. Well, congratulations.
Thank you. I can't wait to get started.
And then last but certainly not least for the shout outs and announcements, congratulations to all of our graduating seniors. If you are a senior, it's lots of years in the making, lots of lots of hours put into your studies. Congratulations. I know it's coming to the end, but hold on to the light at the end of the tunnel. You're almost there. So congratulations to all of our Kappa Delta Rho seniors. We're super excited for you and your next step in your journey. And then the last big announcement that I have is that this is kind of like our semester finale for the spring. This is our last Kimball Talk for this year, but you are more than welcome to visit and rewatch all of our Kimball Talks for this semester, the spring, on our YouTube page. It's youtube.com /KDR National. All of the Kimball Talks have been recorded and are up there. We've had some really, really good ones, not bragging or anything like that. Like we really have had really, really good ones. So if you missed one or you'd like to rewatch them to get some inspiration or hear some great stories, please go visit that. They're all there for you. So without further ado, let me pull up my introduction. So now I have the privilege of introducing this month's Kimball Talk speaker. Brother Bryson Keith is an internal medicine resident physician at the University of Miami / Jackson Memorial Hospital. He completed his undergraduate studies at the University of Detroit Mercy, where he was a brother of the Alpha Gamma chapter of Kappa Delta Rho. During his time in undergrad, Bryson served as both the chapter secretary and the consul. He later went on to serve KDR as an undergraduate director and was later elected to continue his service on the board of directors as the National Philanthropy Chair. During his 6 years on the KDR board of directors, Brother Keith completed a master's of bioengineering at the University of Colorado, followed by his doctorate of osteopathic medicine at A.T. Still University. Bryson has served in many leadership roles, including president of the Colorado Biomedical Engineering Society and SGA president for A.T. Still University. Currently, Brother Keith is finishing his term as the National Clinical Education Representative for the American Association of Colleges of Osteopathic Medicine. What a mouthful. And was recently elected to serve as a commissioner for the National Board of Osteopathic Medical Examiners, where he is charged with helping ensure high degrees of innovation and excellence in American medical board licensing examinations. So without further ado, I am super excited to hear from him. I will pass the mic over to Brother Bryson Keith. Thank you so much, Bryson, for being on here tonight for our Kimball Talk.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super excited to be here. It's always nice to see some familiar faces out there. Hey, Caleb, how's it going? And then I see Harrison too. So it's nice to see you guys. I'm super just excited to talk to you guys, Brian. I'm super glad you reached out to me. It's been quite a long journey for myself, kind of getting to where I am today. And I love kind of reflecting back and being able to share at least some of the knowledge that I've gleaned along the way. And you know, some kind of tips and tricks that I found to be super helpful for me through all my different work. So I will say, I'll probably go ahead and start sharing my screen here. I like to do super informal presentations. So if you guys have any questions or anything that comes up from anyone else, feel free to either put it in the chat. Feel free to interrupt me. I don't mind at all. I definitely can start kind of going on tangents about things. I'm really good at that. I'm sure Marco could agree with me. So if I get off topic, feel free to bring me back, but I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen here. Can you guys all see that okay? Okay, perfect. Alrighty. So just to kind of start off with a quick agenda. So I'm going to tell you guys a little bit kind of about my story, how I went from kind of undergrad through my master's and then all the way through to finishing my doctorate this year. And kind of like I mentioned, taking some lessons that I've learned along the way, mostly through a lot of the advocacy work that I've done. And then obviously we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So to kind of get started here. So hi everyone, my name's Bryson. Brian, thanks so much for the introduction. So like he said, I am just starting in a position as an internal medicine resident physician at the University of Miami / Jackson Memorial Hospital. I am just now finishing medical school. So that's then I realized I calculated this was my 11th year of college. So I'm very excited to finally be done with that. I'm not excited to be starting a real job, you know, like a normal human, and try to put that off as long as possible. So, but in addition to that, you know, a couple ways that I would describe myself. So I am a bioengineer. That's what I got my master's in. I love design work, engineering, and I'll kind of go into why I ended up kind of leaving that field to pursue medicine, but it's still something I like to do. I still have an engineer brain, I'd like to think. But then the last thing that I kind of put on there was advocate. Throughout my undergraduate, you know, graduate and doctorate program, I have spent a lot of time doing a lot of advocacy work, especially now, probably more than ever. I spend a lot of time doing patient advocacy as well as physician advocacy. With everything kind of going on in the world right now, medicine is a very hot topic as far as both patient and physician rights, you know, single payer Medicaid, that type of thing. So there's plenty of work to be done, I'll put it that way. And it's something that I've really enjoyed. So hopefully you guys kind of enjoy hearing my story, and if anything can maybe glean a little bit of insight and useful information. You know, and if not, then oh well. So we'll go ahead and get started. So to kind of start off with, so just kind of briefly go over my story. So I titled this like Long Road to Finding Your Passion, because like I said, it's been my 11th year of college. So it took me quite a while. And to take after one of my dear fraternity brothers, Mr. Caleb Conrad, I'm going to start off with a quote, one of my favorites, which is, if at first you don't succeed, then skydiving is probably not for you. I just think this is hilarious. But this is by Stephen Wright. I always like to start with something funny, and I thought this was very appropriate, especially in the terms of like higher education and that type of thing, you know, especially when you're going through undergraduate. I remember thinking I knew what I wanted to do, but then realizing I had no idea what it was that I wanted to do. And, you know, kind of how I spent the last few years getting to where I am today. So my kind of overview journey of where I got to where I am today. So I started off in 2010 at the University of Detroit Mercy. And I'll kind of talk about that a little bit later. So I was pursuing a bachelor's of civil engineering, and I was also concurrently doing a bachelor's of science and biology. I spent 5 years for undergrad and got 2 degrees. I thought I wanted to be a civil engineer, thought I wanted to do like structural engineering. And then about year 3 of engineering school, I actually started getting into structural engineering and realizing how dry it was and how much I hated math. So I kind of quickly realized, crap, what am I going to do to turn this ship around? So after undergrad, what I did was I pursued a master's in bioengineering, mostly because I really wanted to still use my kind of engineering training that I had, but I really liked the biomedical side of things more. I like the medical industry more. And honestly, civil engineers are really, really boring. I'm sorry if there's any civil engineers on here, anybody who's watching this, but I'm a little bit too social and perky, I think, for the field of civil engineering. So that was kind of how I was making a career shift. And when I was at Colorado, I did a lot of research, mostly in device design, a lot of stuff with Down syndrome kids, which was really fun. But what I realized was in working kind of in that space, what I really enjoyed was working more with people. And honestly, I really wanted to be able to use the devices that I was designing and be more involved in that process. So I halfway through my master's program decided that I was going to go to medical school, much to the chagrin to my parents, who were hoping that I would just be done soon, and not be living at their house anymore. I'm just kidding, because I know my mom is probably watching this. That would be very her. So after that, I pursued a degree in osteopathic medicine. So I have a DO degree, which is equivalent to an MD degree. Just kind of an overview about that. And I know Marco, who's on here, could also explain it too. So MD and DO degrees are very equivalent. We're both physicians. The kind of main difference between the two is that DO physicians tend to look at people and at disease in like a whole person healthcare type of thing. So we don't like to look at diseases, we like to look at people, and we like to treat people. So that was something that really, kind of called to me. So that's where I pursued that. And I had the pleasure of going to school at AT Still University, which is a school based in Arizona, which actually the university is the first DO program opened back in the 1800s. But I had the pleasure of spending 3 years of my medical training in Honolulu, Hawaii. So I have had 0 complaints about that for the last 3 years, and it currently is 83 degrees and sunny. There are no tornadoes here, so I never have to worry about that. But so after my time here, I'll be headed to Miami for my residency, which I'm very excited to not have to ever see snow again. After spending 5 years in Michigan for undergrad, I was very much over that portion of things. So to kind of talk a little bit about undergrad more, I wanted to share some pictures with you guys that I felt like were a good synopsis of my undergraduate tenure. I really enjoyed my time at Detroit Mercy. It's a small private Catholic school in the heart of Detroit, about 2 miles away from where Eminem grew up. So in a very cultured part of Detroit, we will say that. It was a really good time. Like I said, I spent 5 years there. It's a small campus of about 5,000 students if you include all of the graduate and doctoral programs that they had. And I, in my winter semester of freshman year, joined the Alpha Gamma chapter of Kappa Delta Rho. And I am still very good friends with a lot of my brothers that you see in some of these pictures. I know about 3 of them are on the call right now. So kind of some fun pictures that I wanted to share with you guys. This is a picture of us in front of our house here over Christmas one year when it was magically not snowing. I don't know how that happened. We had a pretty close-knit Greek life on our campus, and Greek Week was one of the big things that we did every year, and I'm happy to say that we won 4 out of the 5 years that I was there, which I think is pretty important. Thanks, Harrison, I saw that. But yes, that was a really good time. I really enjoyed Detroit Mercy. I really found a family there, and I really found a family in my KDR brothers. And like I said, I still talk and converse with many of them today. I served as both the praetor and consul for the chapter, which was a big learning experience for me as far as professionally, communication, all of that type of stuff. And I ended up loving it so much that I ran for an undergraduate board of directors position, and I won, which was really great. So I got to serve my brothers nationally on the board of directors, and then later served as a full-fledged director and national philanthropy chair, which was pretty cool. And I'll kind of go into some of the work I did with that later. But to kind of keep going a little bit here in my schooling, I guess. So after Detroit Mercy, I went to the University of Colorado Anschutz Medical Campus, which is CU's big medical campus. And kind of like I had mentioned earlier, I did a lot there with device engineering. My kind of main project that I did at University of Colorado was software engineering for Colorado Children's Hospital. So a lot of what I did was doing translational device design, basically getting medical devices to talk to each other or talk to the electronic medical record. So my master's project that I did there was to get pediatric dialysis machines to talk directly to our EMR, which is Epic, so that physicians, nurses, any type of medical practitioner could figure out real fast, when you have a pediatric kid on dialysis, which doesn't happen too much, thank goodness. But when it does happen, there's a lot of information that comes out of that, and it's really important that you have accurate, up-to-date data, especially when kids are what we call on circuit, where they're actively getting dialysis. And for kids who are peds patients or maybe NICU patients, if you think of the amount of blood that it takes to run through a dialysis machine, that could be like a third of the total blood volume of a kid. So it was pretty important that we knew when they were going to come off circuit or if there's issues. So I helped create some software that did that. But in addition to that, I also did some design work for Boston Scientific, mostly doing catheter device design and those type of things for like interventional radiology and interventional cardiology, which it was fun. It's a pretty exciting thing. Biomedical engineering can be a very sexy thing because there is a lot of money involved in biomedical engineering. But at the same time, it can be a very dry thing, especially when you start talking about, the Food and Drug Administration and the patent process and that type of thing. And I know anyone out there who's been through the patent process, how big of a pain in the rear end it can be. So then after Colorado, I pursued my DO degree at A.T. Still University, School of Osteopathic Medicine in Arizona, where I did quite a few different things. I personally am not the kind of person that can really just sit down and only study. I've got to kind of get my hands in the middle of everything, got to try everything once. So I found my way, from other things into Student Government Association there. I also joined the United States Navy for medical school. So they paid for my medical school, which was great. So I served as a reservist in the Navy for 4 years during medical school. And like I said, I was fortunate enough to be able to do all of my training in Honolulu, Hawaii. So we just finished our graduation here. And honestly, probably one of my favorite parts of being out here in Hawaii was we got to do a lot of training with the Native Hawaiian Cultural Center here, doing a lot of Native Hawaiian healing practices, a lot of nutritional medicine, a lot of lifestyle medicine, which as osteopathic physicians, we tend to be really in tune with. When you're looking at someone from a whole body health perspective, nutrition, diet, mental health, and all of those things are extremely important things. And something that I took away from the Native Hawaiian healing was how important, the connection between mind, body, and spirit was, and also how important, that sense of community is from like a healthcare perspective, and how much your community can really have an impact on your health in general. So let's see here. Man, I feel like I'm flying, Brian. I'm doing great on time. I love this. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So some things that I kind of wanted to go into as far as 11 years spent in undergrad doing lots of different things. I wanted to go over some things that I have learned, and as well as some things that I continue to observe that I think can be really beneficial to anyone in any profession, especially in the lens of advocacy and communication. I think especially for us as fraternity men, you know, this is something that we utilize every day as part of our, you know, recruitment, as we're interacting with our brothers, as we're interacting as a group and as an individual with our universities. Being able to communicate effectively and advocate for yourself and your brothers is something that is extremely important, and that, you know, really never goes away, funny enough. Kind of funny how life works like that. But so to kind of get into that, so my background specifically on leadership and advocacy, I just wanted to kind of touch on this because, like I said, I'm the kind of person that likes to kind of get my hands in the middle of everything. So I've done quite a bit. And so just to kind of summarize some of the things I've done. So I got a picture right there of me and my, you know, most favorite executive director, Mr. Joseph Rosenberg, well, Dr. Joseph Rosenberg, excuse me, I most misrepresented him there. This was at one of our conventions, gosh, I think in St. Louis. And I think this was when I was giving an update on our national philanthropy, which I always enjoyed convention and meeting all the other brothers and everything. But so as far as like leadership and advocacy goes, I'd say it really kind of started for me at my local KDR chapter at Alpha Gamma, in our house that had the bars on the windows because we were in Detroit. It's a very fond memory of mine. So fond, in fact, that when our ELI, Mr. Brian Fields, came to visit us, he had part of his car stolen from right out in front of our lawn. So he got a real nice taste of Detroit.
That is correct. Yes, that is correct.
Bryson, I just want to point out you're giving a great representation of the Alpha Gamma chapter.
Thank you.
We really are represented so well right now.
We were hardened. It just made us tougher.
True. Very true. So like I said, my kind of leadership and advocacy started at Alpha Gamma. I served as the praetor and afterwards served as the consul, which I really enjoyed, but was also a lot of work. Our brothership at the time was up to about 40 brothers when I was consul. So I definitely felt like I had the role of herding cats for a lot of the time. So I would say that my intro into effective communication and advocacy really started in that position. You know, going past that, when I was in my master's program, I served as the president for the Colorado Biomedical Engineering Society, which was somewhat of a similar role, but more so in a professional sense. So I got to take a lot of the skills that I had learned at Alpha Gamma with me and apply those in more of like a professional lens. So doing a lot more of professional networking events, connecting our organization to outside businesses, job opportunities, that type of thing. So it was a little bit of a change for me, but something I still enjoyed a lot. And then when I was at AT Still University, I served as our Student Government Association's vice president and president. So I was basically in charge of representing the student voice for our medical school, both to our school and to some of the outside national organizations, that was a tough time. Medical school is definitely not easy, as I know Marco on here can attest to. I'm amazed that you've got time to tune in, so I appreciate that. But going through that and still trying to work as an advocate, it's amazing how much you really, especially in medical school, learn how much, you know, segmenting your time and your free time and how important really that is for you and your mental health. It was a lot, but I was really happy I did it. And then from then I moved on to an executive board position within what's called the Council of Osteopathic Student Government Presidents. So under the, sorry, I'm going to throw a lot of acronyms at everyone here. So under the American Association of Colleges of Osteopathic Medicine, which is the parent organization for all DO medical programs in the country. There's about 55 DO programs in the country. All of the Student Government Association presidents and vice presidents meet together 4 times a year to discuss issues that are affecting students, issues that are affecting like patients, issues that are affecting access to medical care, those type of things. So I was elected to serve as the National Clinical Education Representative for that group. So I effectively was in charge of representing over 30,000 medical students to outside bodies for their interest regarding clinical education specifically. So kind of what that was as far as medicine goes was in your 4 years of medical school, you typically do 2 years of didactics and then 2 years of clinical education where you do your rotations. You're actually spending time working in the hospital. So my job serving on this board was mostly to ensure that all of our students had adequate access to really good teaching hospitals and facilities to make sure that they were getting the training that they needed to be successful as physicians, but also make sure that in those times where students are typically by themselves and separated from their campus, that they felt that they had adequate access to the resources that they needed. Most specifically, mental health resources. It is an unfortunate fact that the medical profession and physicians especially have one of the highest suicide rates of any profession out there. The amount of, I think the numbers kind of wane, but typically the amount of physicians and medical students that commit suicide every year could fill an entire medical school class of students. The number is that high, unfortunately. So it's something that I was very passionate about and something that our organization was very passionate about, making sure that our students had adequate access to mental health resources, made sure that they felt like they were supported by their medical schools. And this came a really huge factor when COVID hit. I had just started my position when COVID hit. And when that happened, almost overnight, all medical students across the country got pulled out of rotations. And that is the primary teacher for 3rd and 4th year students. And you can imagine how pulling students away from that learning environment, from the teaching environment, from their friends and faculty, and everyone staying at home can take quite a toll on their mental health as well as on their education. So I played a big part in making sure that students had what they needed, making sure schools also had what they needed, that we were sharing resources between each other to kind of push past the pandemic and make the best out of a bad situation. A lot of schools, and including myself, went to a totally remote online curriculum, which I'm sure many of you can imagine. I don't think you would want to know that your physician was trained doing online modules versus in the hospital. Not the most ideal teaching format for medical school, but we were able to kind of segue and pull in some things such as health system science, and diversity, equity, and inclusion training to make sure that the physicians that our colleges are producing these days are A, competent physicians, and B, equipped to serve the population at hand. Obviously, the United States of America is an extremely diverse population, whether it be in race, socioeconomic status, whatever it may be. And part of the issue with healthcare access and healthcare delivery comes from physicians themselves. So, we need to make sure that we're training our physicians to be adequately prepared to deliver medicine in a effective way through the medical system that we currently have. So that was something that I worked a lot on during that time. And because of that, I think is why I was asked to serve as a commissioner for the National Board of Osteopathic Medical Examiners, which is kind of the current role I'm doing outside of my day-to-day work. And what the NBOME is they are the ones who set the standards for board licensure for DO physicians. So when you think of physicians or medical students, when they say that they're taking their boards, this is the nonprofit or entity that's in charge of deciding what those exams are testing. So kind of why I was brought on in general was A, because of COVID and everything that had happened there, but also because the NBOME, which I have to give them a lot of props for, is very invested in making sure that their board and licensing exams are very innovative and ready to address the needs of healthcare today. So most of my job sitting on this board now is making sure that are we testing what we need to be testing to develop able and competent physicians. especially with the changing atmosphere and how healthcare is drastically different based on your socioeconomic status and drastically different depending on your geographic location. So that's, you know, kind of the brief synopsis of my leadership experience. So it's been a wild road, but something that I still really enjoy doing, and something that I think kind of keeps me going every day and gives me a nice 30,000 foot view. So, you know, kind of through all of these positions, some of the skills that I think that I've been able to hone really well, and which are kind of some of the points that I wanted to talk to everybody about, are my communication skills and how insanely important communication is, not just in my profession, but just, you know, in life in general. So what I will be kind of talking about next is some lessons that I've learned through communication. And hopefully you guys find these interesting, and some things that maybe you can adapt and make them your own, or take home, or even share with other people. Especially us in the fraternity world, we all know, I think, how important effective communication is, and how important it is to set yourself up for success, and being aware of how you're perceived, you know, in different spaces. So I wanted to spend some time talking about that. So the first form of communication, which is kind of how I've split this across, that I wanted to discuss, was emails. Sure, all of us deal with emails. I can't imagine anyone who doesn't. And I am sure many of us, I can't even tell you how many emails Bob must get a day, because I know he's a busy guy. I probably get like 200 emails a day, which is kind of disgusting when you think about it. And, you know, of forms of communication, I think email is very effective, but also somewhat crude. And so, you know, there's always room for improvement. So what I kind of wanted to talk about with emails is how you really use email effectively so that people actually, you know, read your crap that you want to be talking about. I, for one, especially when I was serving as consul, would love when some of my brothers, like Harrison, who's on the call, would say that they were not aware, you know, of something that was going on because they didn't see the email. And I'm like, oh my God, you know, I spent 2 hours making that email and you didn't even read it. Like, I'm over here pulling my hair out. And I'm just kidding. Harrison was one of the ones that actually read the emails. But something that I found the most effective, especially working in the medical field and when you're working with people who get a lot of emails today, is that I think some of the most underutilized space is the actual subject line of the email. And what I found to be most effective in actually getting response and getting your message across is to put basically in less than a sentence the entire whole point of your email in that subject line. So for example, and I'll kind of show you some of this in a little bit too, in a subject line where I need to, let's see, say I'm like coordinating jackets for my residency program and I need them to respond by a certain date. So the subject line that I would personally use is like, jacket order form due at this date, you know, yada, 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 so that they know exactly what's in that email, and why that they should read it. And I think this sounds really simple, but I am never cease to be amazed by the amount of people who A, don't use a subject line, or B, have a very generic subject line. My husband, for example, works for Facebook and doing a lot of like digital marketing and that type of stuff. So I know networking, especially in that field, is extremely important. And I know he gets hundreds of messages on LinkedIn every day for people who are trying to work for Facebook. And, you know, he's always also complaining about this thing, is that when you get that many, you know, how do you filter through and find out exactly which ones you need to read? Because I think it's very easy to be overlooked, especially when, you know, you're emailing someone who maybe works in administration or works in the president's office, who probably gets quite a few emails a day, and you definitely don't want them skipping over your emails. So next thing that I'll say about emails, and it's going to be the last thing that I say about emails, is, you know, don't be afraid of color or font or changing the sizes up. So this is one that I had done for jackets, and I like to make sure when I write emails, I love the term, you know, if you kiss it, you keep it simple, stupid, or keep it stupid, simple. So what I like to do with emails is I like to especially make sure, especially if I have a lot of stuff that I need to put in an email, just because the email necessitates it, is that, you know, utilization of different sizes, different fonts, and different colors can be really important. Naturally, as a human, your eyes are going to be drawn to the biggest and brightest things that are on that screen. So I have found that it's really effective to make sure that whatever is the most important thing that's going on that email, usually a due date or whatever information I need back, is going to be the biggest, brightest, and probably red thing on the entire email. So for example, for this, a good example of herding cats, when I was coordinating jackets for a jacket order for about 400 medical students, which was just the most distinct pleasure I had of doing in medical school. I found the most important thing would be actually the due date that they needed to respond and pay me, you know, kind of important. So that's what I made biggest, and that due date came in bright red. The other things that I have on here, you know, kind of a link to the actual order form was right on top, and then the most important information right on the bottom. Because in my mind, if I don't have time to read this, or if I'm sending this out, you know, the most important things that I need to look at are going to be the ones that are on top and the ones that are on bottom. And that's just what people's eyes will naturally go to, especially when they're reading emails. And I think it's fascinating. There's a whole science behind how your eyes track when you enter a room or open an email or something, which is why a lot of storefronts will put, you know, their newest item on the left side, because there's studies that show when you walk in a store, you immediately look straight ahead and then turn to the left or turn to the right. So I think that's fascinating, and you might as well use that to your advantage, especially when you're working behind a desk. And I'm sure this is only more important nowadays that all of us are working from home. And, you know, I think honestly an email looks more fun if you put colors in it. Like, come on, life is too short to be black and white. Let's be honest. I'm a big, you know, fan of color myself. So I will leave it at that. But so kind of going on from there, I wanted to spend a little bit talking about verbal communication. So I do have to add in a little bit of GIFs to my PowerPoint so it doesn't get too boring. And I love Drag Race, so that's always going to make it in there. I know that's Harrison's favorite too. So there's a couple points that I wanted to bring up on verbal communication. So, and I want to talk about these a little bit. So mostly what I'm going to be talking about is tailoring your communication to whoever it is that you're talking to. And obviously that seems like a very duh thing, that you would tailor your communication to whoever you're talking to. But some things that I've learned over the years, whether it be in advocacy or working with patients, something that I like doing a lot now is starting either my discussions or my talk with someone with a question. I'd say where I use this the most is when I'm either working with clients for engineering or working with patients. And to use an example, I think some of the hardest conversations I've ever had to have, and I think that anyone ever has to have, is discussing either end of life wishes with patients and their family, or discussing the prognosis of someone in the hospital or with their family. So to kind of use an example, space I work a lot in is the intensive care unit, you know, where the sickest of the sick go, where we have to have, unfortunately, a lot of these conversations with family. A lot of people who are in the ICU are typically intubated, which means they're on a breathing machine, they're totally paralyzed, so they're not able to talk for themselves. So a lot of times we're having to have these talks with family members, with next of kin, to help us make, you know, important medical decisions. So something that I've found really effective, and something that I learned from some of my mentors in medicine, is starting with a question and really identifying what the person or people you're talking to, you know, knows about the situation, the scenario, or what's going on. And it, you know, never ceases to amaze me how many assumptions you make about what someone might know about something. And I'm very guilty of this, you know, as a physician. You know, when I think of a patient who's in the ICU, who's intubated, who's on a breathing machine, who is getting assist to help pump their heart, you know, obviously, in my opinion, things are probably not looking too good, right? But the unfortunate reality is that, and I like to blame medical TV dramas. I love to blame Grey's Anatomy about this. People in America and a lot of patients have a very misguided understanding of medicine today, and what it is that we're actually able to do people, and how realistic it is that we are able to, you know, kind of turn people around. And I know I can see Marco smiling up there because I'm sure he's dealt with this too. So something that I like to talk about with is when I'm approaching a patient's family is I like to ask them, what do you know about what's going on, with your husband or, your dad or something? What do you think, their status is? And kind of hearing what their take on everything is, what their understanding is. And, something that we get asked a lot, which is kind of interesting to me, is we always get asked, is he going to make it? How is he doing? What does this look like? And I always like to ask people, well, what do you think? Do you think he's doing good right now? Maybe in a little bit different tone, but something that I think is good is to really lay that groundwork for understanding of where does this person, how much information do they have that they're coming to the table with, and how much do I need to explain to them as far as where they're at? And I think that's especially helpful with things like this, other topics about, if we're having end of life discussions, like, do people want a DNR, a do not resuscitate? I like to ask people, and this is also because of some of the medical TV dramas, well, what do you know about CPR? What do you know about, resuscitation efforts, or what we might have to do if you decided that you would want everything done for you? Because a lot of people, especially in medicine, don't realize that if we have to do CPR on you, you have probably about less than a 20% chance of survival, and a less than 1% chance of return to baseline from that, meaning, you're returning to exactly how you were before we had to do that. And, just going up to someone being like, hey, if we had to do this, would you want CPR? Do you want us to put you on a breathing machine? Yes, no, cool, got it. Unfortunately, that's a topic that I think is often too rushed. And a lot of people don't really fully understand what that all entails. And even people who do have chronic conditions who know they're not doing too well still really don't have a good idea of, maybe how bad their condition might be. Or how realistic it might be that that we're able to get them out of the hospital or something like that. So I think that method of starting with question and finding out exactly what it is that people know is really effective and can be used across, multiple different specialties, modalities. So kind of moving on from that, and this is another kind of seemingly dull one, is tailoring your language to the audience. Obviously, you want to do this to make sure that you're not speaking over someone, using a lot of acronyms that they don't know, or that type of thing. But I think what's more important, especially in the realm of like advocacy, and in the realm of us being fraternity men, where we, on a lot of campuses might have a certain people, have a certain idea of what fraternity men are like, or what different fraternities are like on different campuses, and that can really impact your conversation when you need to talk about different things. So I think even more so than tailoring your language is finding out as much as you can about the people that you're going to have a conversation with, and about how they like to be talked to, per se. So for example, I am very much a visual person. When I'm, either being lectured towards or I'm learning something, I love having like the visual cues. I also am like a very emotional person. So if someone is able to relate someone as to why like this would emotionally benefit someone else or something like that, then I'm very bought in. Versus other people, and there's a lot of engineers who are like this way, are much more data driven. They want to see the hard facts, they want to see the data. And so I think knowing those things ahead of time, whether you're speaking to someone's colleague, speaking to, a family member of a patient or something, and finding out, how is it that this person likes to be discussed with? Do you know what they, kind of cue into hearing about? And I can think of, for example, Scott Bradley, the current Grand Worthy Consul. He is very much a data-driven individual. I think it's just because he's from Texas, but that's just me. So him and I always kind of had a hard time understanding each other because I'm a very emotionally driven person. He's all very data oriented. So when we were going over, finance documents on the board of directors for KDR, the second that Excel spreadsheet pops up on a slide, I am like so far lost in La La Land. I no longer care what's going on. And then there's people like Scott who are like so cued in, you know, really tuned into what's going on with that. So I think it's really important to be able to figure that out ahead of time. And if you can't figure it out ahead of time, you know, just asking and finding out from that person in the moment, kind of rolling with the punches in that way, I think, you know, can make your verbal communication or any communication, you know, much more effective. And then the last one that I wanted to kind of talk about here, so I don't talk everyone's head off too much, is reinforcing your primary goals. And this one I've used a lot, especially in advocacy work when I've dealt with outside organizations who kind of have their own agenda. So for example, a hot topic this year was one of the licensing exams for MD and DO students was potentially going to get canceled because of COVID. And the reason for not canceling it from the licensing bodies was, you know, it's our job as a licensing organization to have the public's best interest at heart, and to protect the public. And keeping that in mind, this exam still needs to be administered because that is the primary reason for the exam to begin with, versus myself acting on behalf of my constituents and my fellow medical students. You know, my primary concern is the safety of that administration and the safety of my fellow medical students. The exam that I'm talking about was one that students had to travel to one of 2 locations in the country. And you can imagine that during a pandemic, it's probably not the best idea to have, you know, 3,000 medical students from all over the country flying into Chicago, where there's, you know, a hot box of viral activity. So I think, you know, discussions about those things, you know, at that high level can get very heated, because people are very quick to, you know, be defensive and reactive and assume that you don't necessarily care about why or what they're bringing to the table. And I think it's really good, especially in those meetings, to reinforce your primary goals and especially who you're speaking on behalf of. So when I would be in these meetings, I would always start off with, you know, my name, say who I was, and say that I'm representing the interest of the student physician voice. And that is why I'm here today. And also, you know, acknowledging why, you know, I understand why you're saying that. And I like why someone else is there. Like, we would have some kind of heated debates about licensing, and it was always good, I thought, to acknowledge that, you know, I really appreciate why you say that, because I realize that you're just, you know, trying to do your best at protecting the public, which is your job, and I'm just trying to do the best to do this, which is my job. Especially for things that can get really heated, I think it's really good to always, you know, give people props for that, and give props to yourself as to why you're doing those things and why you're here, and realizing that this isn't, you know, just a 1v1, you know, butt heads, who's going to be right battle type of thing. But, you know, when you put it in the sense of the big picture, you know, why it is that you're doing what you're doing. Okay, I think I've talked enough on this slide, and hopefully I'm not losing any of you. I see Brian laughing, so that makes me happy. So the last one that I'll go to is utilization of visual aids. So to kind of, and you know, it's going to be ironic because I'm totally using a PowerPoint right now, but I do want to talk a little bit about PowerPoint, and the inevitable death via PowerPoint. You know, this is something that we have become very accustomed to in undergrad, and definitely does not change from medical school. You know, and I love being talked at for 50 minutes as much as the next person, but let's be honest, that sucks. Not fun. So I wanted to just give some like really quick tips on how to avoid the death by PowerPoint. You know, I think this is kind of a funny one that I pulled off of Google Images. It's really important, where all these, especially in the sciences, in engineering and sciences, it's really prevalent, where we put these really, really complex diagrams up on the screen, or maybe in finance, you put all of these numbers up on the screen. And kind of like I had mentioned earlier, you know, I'm immediately checked out. Probably 99% of the people you're talking to are already checked out, because they're not going to spend the time to read all that. And if they are reading all that, they're not listening to what you have to say. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation there. So my like kind of 3 little tips and bullet points for that are, your title should be your main take-home point. It should never be hidden in the text of you know, what you have on the slide. It should never be hidden within the graphic of what you have on the slide. The way that I think about it, and the way that I was taught by actually a really successful biomedical engineer who was in sales, was that, you know, if they only had 2 seconds to look at your slide, what are they going to get out of it? And if they literally only have time to look at the title, you need them to be able to get everything out of that slide that you needed them to get out of it in that title. Graphics are great, tables are great, but if someone can interpret them or understand them, then, you know, obviously you still need to get your point across. And the title is honestly really the best place to do that. But I think we all are very easily lost in the black hole of PowerPoint of just saying, you know, title and continued and this continued. So something to avoid. Another one is, in general, more graphics are always better. Obviously not loading up down a screen with graphics and being too crazy, but pictures are definitely worth 1,000 words. And I think anyone who's had the death by PowerPoint would agree that a picture is definitely better than 1,000 words, and probably more exciting too. And especially because very few people are, you know, like written word learners. People are much more kinesthetic or visual learners. That's much more important. And that ties into what I was saying, is the third one is less words as well. So honestly, overall, that was kind of the main few things as far as like communication and advocacy points that I've kind of garnered along the way, and something that I continuously, even, you know, with physicians and professionals who have been around for many, many years, still do today. So that is pretty much all that I had for everyone. I wanted to make sure we save time at the end for anyone who has questions and answers. So I'll kind of flip forward to that. But I'm happy to discuss anything and everything, any questions you might have. If there's questions about medical school or, you know, other stuff like that, happy to do so. But just wanted to make sure that we had some time for that. So just wanted to say thank you to everyone for having me. Thanks to KDR. I owe a lot to you. So, and thanks for having me, Brian. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And we thank you for sharing your time and stories and all that stuff with us tonight. It was really cool to kind of see the marriage, or how, you know, your leadership capabilities kind of opens up to, you know, that communication. Like, how do you do it all, right? And you've learned a lot of things along the way, so that's great. So if you have a question for Bryson, please put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand on Zoom and I'll call on you and you can ask it yourself. You can use like we'll get to you, Caleb. I think there was a question Irving wanted to ask, how unrealistic is Grey's Anatomy?
It depends on which part of Grey's Anatomy. Overall, you know, they don't do too bad, but I think some things, honestly, the ones that really get me are when they will like pull lab values or draw someone's blood, and then like all of a sudden 2 minutes later those lab values are back. I'm like, wow, that would actually be really great if those turn around that fast. Some things take up to 3 days, so that's not realistic. But Scrubs is actually by far the most correct one, I would say. House is pretty bad, as much as I loved House. But overall, yeah, they're not the best. They definitely spice that up for the drama a little bit.
Awesome. I'll take a Bryson's take of, you know, medical dramas, and I'll take that to heart for sure. Caleb, go ahead, and then I'll be on to Harrison next.
My dog and I, Birdie, were wondering, Bryson, with all this experience that you kind of walked us through today, and thank you for taking the time to give some insight into that background. What's next on the horizon for you, man? Like what's within your scope, and what's kind of on the roadmap here?
Oh man, Caleb, I wish I had the answer. No, so I will be headed to Miami for my internal medicine residency for the next 3 years. After that, it's kind of up in the air as far as like physician training go. So I'm specializing in internal medicine, and then there's a chance I might subspecialize afterwards. I personally really like cardiology and critical care medicine, which is intensive care unit stuff. But I don't know. We'll see where the road takes me. So who knows? Good to see you, Caleb.
That's the joy and the adventure of it, right, Bryson?
Right.
Harrison, what's up?
Brian, how you doing? Bryson, brother Keith, how are you? So my question is specifically related to kind of your later part of your presentation and kind of the PowerPoint side of things. A lot of what you mentioned is what I remember we were taught in school, of very minimal slides and very maximal talking. I'm curious, you've studied at Detroit, in Colorado, Arizona, and now Hawaii. So you've experienced multiple different cultures along your journey here. I've noticed in the business side of things and engineering that there's a lot of different presentation styles and that equate to different cultures. Specifically, the Japanese style tends to be the exact opposite of what we're taught, which is maximal information on the slide and minimal talking. So I'm curious, just kind of get your opinion of with everywhere that you've studied and everybody that you've interacted with, have you interacted with different types of cultures, and how have you adapted to those different cultures in your presentation styles as you've moved forward?
That's a really good question, Harrison. I think that's
I'm good with good questions.
True, you always have been. Well, that's fascinating too, because I'm not surprised that because you're still at Denso, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So that's interesting that the Japanese style, I could totally see like that. I
don't mean to put you on the
necessarily-
spot. I'm just curious, genuinely curious.
Oh, no, you're good. I wouldn't say, as far as like a cultural perspective, I haven't interacted with any cultures that they're drastically different. I would say, well, actually, I take that back. The native Hawaiian culture out here is a little bit different in that they're extremely family oriented. So in that sense, when we at our healthcare center are giving talks or presentations to Native Hawaiians, especially older Native Hawaiians, we actually typically don't use PowerPoint at all. We make it completely like small group or like Socratic seminar based, because in the Hawaiian culture, especially, that feeling of and sense of community is much more important. So that's how we try to drive our presentations and our talks. So when we do that, we don't usually even use PowerPoints or anything like that. If anything, we'll do more like group activities and small, like more one-on-one things. So it can be difficult because, that's easier said than done if you have one presenter and 30 people you're presenting to. We always tried to have it be much more like one person leading a discussion with like 4 people, where we're kind of just getting to an endpoint and trying to help people along to getting that way.
For sure.
But that's an interesting point that you bring up. And I know I'll be working a lot with a couple different cultures in Miami, so I'm curious to see how that changes.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I was just curious if you had interacted with that. I know that there's a large Asian population in Hawaii as well. And so I was curious if you had interacted with that, or if you had seen something like that impact what you have to go through.
Yeah, I would say yes too, because in general, in the field of medicine, if you're going to give a talk on your research per se, not that I'm the biggest fan of it, but there are a lot of things that you have to fit into those slides, because especially if you're presenting to a group of physicians who are going to want the hard data, then that hard data needs to be on that slide, because you can't just state things without having data to back them up, or it just sounds like you make it look like you're kind of pulling things out of your butt.
Yeah,
for lack of a better term. So
there's no better term. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Brother Keith. I appreciate the answer.
Yeah. Thanks, Harrison.
Awesome. We have a few more things in the chat. Just want to point out that Colleen had a few things to say. I think the next step, wherever you end up, she requests that you do it, it's more close to home. So just wanted to highlight that. That was in the chat.
I'll bet she would.
Nate has a question. Where on earth did you learn the skills and motivation to have such an intense and rigorous career schedule? How do you keep up with everything?
Oh man, that was a learning process. I think it's partially my personality. Number one is I'm someone who I would have like what I would call like life recall bias. Like I like doing things that are like kind of in the fast and in the now. And I get that kind of like, squirrel where I see like something shiny and I'm like, oh, I want to do that. So I typically try to get involved in a lot of different things. And I like to at least try things, one time. It's definitely come back to bite me in the butt a couple times where I've definitely like overstretched myself. and taken on too many things. And I can very distinctly remember getting a D in Calc 3 because of that one year, because that was the one class that had to that had to go because I overstretched myself. But as far as like the motivation and like keeping up with it, doing advocacy work is something I truly enjoy. So it doesn't necessarily seem like extra work to me, but I think, and this is something that, you know, we could beat a dead horse to, but really finding that balance of, you know, having your time and setting aside time to do your work and do your other activities, but also setting aside time for other stuff. I always like the idea of, you know, not necessarily that you're too busy to do something, but that you're taking time distinctly away from it, you know, because a lot of people, especially when you are busier, it's very easy to say like, oh, well, they, you know, their priorities must be somewhere else. They don't have time to do things. I wouldn't say that's true. I think it's very important for you to be able to set time away for yourself. And it doesn't mean that you're not passionate about something. It's just that you recognize, you know, how important keeping that balance is and maintaining that balance. Because if you're not, you know, maintaining your own positive work-life balance, I'll call it, then you're going to burn out. You know, so I think it's really important to set hard limits for yourself, and I think that's something that we all kind of learn into and through adulthood, is how to really set those barriers and those limits. But I would say the way that I do it personally is as I am very good at knowing when I'm burning out and knowing when I need to put things down. Over the years, I've become a lot better at delegating things as well, and knowing when, you know, I don't need to have my hand in something per se. But yeah, but definitely taking time away is very important, and especially in the medical field where you're dealing with a lot of heavy crap, it's really important to be able to kind of separate the work and the home. Sorry, that was a long answer.
It's crazy because I feel like I stretch myself thin all the time, and then I hear your story and I'm like, oh my God, it blows my mind. Like, it's crazy. It's so crazy to hear all that stuff that you've accomplished.
And I mean, I will say, as far as like my road to getting to where I am today, when I was like interviewing for medical school, interviewing for residency and that type of thing, people on that train, and you know, maybe this is just my experience, but I was never asked about, you know, well, why did you get a D in Calc 3? You know, or why did you get the grades you did here? It was always like, oh, I saw on your resume or your CV that you did this. That sounds really interesting, you know, that most people don't do. Like, tell me more about that. It's always been a nice like conversational piece to say what I do outside of just academic work or just side out of work within my job. And I think that can really differentiate you, especially like when you're going for a new position or a new job.
All right, I think we'll take one more question from the chat. Eric Kovitz asks, what advice do you give would you give Dr. Fauci and other CDC doctors to best communicate the changes occurring as it relates to COVID in terms of wearing masks, vaccinations, future variants? How would you do it, Bryson?
Oh my gosh. That question is above my pay grade. No, I'm just kidding. That's really tough. I think what inherently, you know, and there's a lot of different opinions about things. What inherently I think people don't necessarily understand about science and medicine in general is that we're not telling you like what's right and what's wrong. We're telling you what we know to be best given the data that we currently have. So I have seen, and I've talked to a lot of patients about this, where they're like, oh, well, why does the CDC keep changing what they're saying or what the recommendations are? And it's because we just have better data. So we're going to update that based on the data we know. As far as how to best communicate that for like mask wearing and vaccination, I think it's honestly, it's a huge issue. You know, we've never had to, nor has the CDC ever had to put something out that's this nationwide, that's impacted so many lives. I think a lot of it doesn't necessarily fall to the CDC, but I think a lot of it falls to the local and state health departments as well. You know, kind of like I was talking to earlier about like Native Hawaiians, for example, or like the Micronesian cultures. They're very, you know, family and community oriented. So like one of the issues we've had in Hawaii is that, you're telling people to social distance and do all that, but how can you do that if you have like 4 generations of family living together? So I think in that sense of getting, the word out, it's really the stakeholders who are there within those communities who have to know how to communicate best to their constituents. I mean, I think the CDC can do as much as they can on, different platforms, whether it be social media or, whatever it is. But I think realistically, there needs to be a lot more partnership between the CDC and state and local, health departments for that. But that's $1 million question, actually more than $1 million. But yeah, that's a really good one.
Yeah, absolutely. So given your, I'll have the, kind of last question, then we'll kind of wrap up here. Given your long career and, I love the visual of the winding road, even now you said, I don't know what's happening next, right? The future is bright. So in honor of our seniors who will be graduating soon, if you could give any piece of advice for people who are feeling that kind of way of, what's next? I don't know. What would you tell them? What advice would you give?
Oh man.
Sorry to stump you on the line. You thought you were almost done, and then boom.
I know. I thought I was clear. Honestly, do you know what I would say for that? Is I think I would find someone who is like a mentor to you, or to other people in your field, whether that be someone from your church, someone from your fraternity, someone from that you knew from school or something like that, and just kind of finding out how they went about doing what they did, and kind of the pathway that they're on. I always, and this is just a personal thing, I love interacting with people who are in very different professions than mine, because I love to just hear like how their brain works and how they think, and I think it's really cool to kind of see that with other people. So as far as graduates, I would say, getting a good mentor and casting a wide net is pretty important. But if you're interested in a field or something, go try to find someone who does that. And don't be afraid to necessarily like cold message or cold call people. That I know it happens probably a little bit more in business world than it does in other world, but I've interacted with other people that way. I found it to be very beneficial. And also don't stress too much. You'll figure it out. I feel like, we all have this kind of inherent idea, especially here, that you need to know exactly what you're going to do with the rest of your life. And I mean, I didn't figure out what I wanted to do until halfway through my master's program, which is unfortunate for my federal loan status, but here we are. So, but yeah, hopefully that answers the question somewhat well.
Yeah, I love that. That is really good advice, and a really good high note to end on, and a great segue for Kimball Talks, right? Because this is a great opportunity to kind of cast that wide net, and use the fraternity network to really make those connections and maybe develop a mentorship. So I speak on behalf of everyone. Thank you so much, Bryson, for spending some time with us, sharing your story, and definitely giving us some key communication tips and tricks and things like that. I definitely appreciate that. So thank you so much. For everyone else, again, please visit our YouTube page for all the other KDR Kimball Talks that we've had this semester, but we will be going on a summer break, and we'll see you again in the fall. But thank you so much for all coming. Thank you, Bryson, and we'll talk to you later. Have a good summer, everyone.
Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
Brian. Thank you, Bryson.
Thanks, Bryson.
Thanks, Bryson.
Thanks, Bryson.
Bye.
Thanks, Bryson.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, Bri. Great work.
Bye. Thank you.
Hi, Miss
Bye,
Trombley.
Caleb.
It's a reunion. I love it. I love
It is.